It's a genuine sensation directly from Politico. While we were all under the impression that the entire negotiation track had stalled indefinitely and that a summit between Putin and Trump would likely never materialize, it now emerges that secret negotiations are actively happening between Moscow and Washington. And it's not just secret negotiations, but rather secret negotiations that are indeed entering their final stage. This, as presented by Politico, pertains specifically to the Ukrainian issue, the Ukrainian dimension. And it states, as you can see, a peace deal as early as this week. This implies that a peace deal could potentially be finalized by the close of this current week. Friends, it's Wednesday today. A peace deal is expected to be finalized by the week's end. And moreover, not simply a peace deal, but a comprehensive framework agreement, as the authors of this sensational article have penned, that aims to satisfy all involved parties. Accordingly, which parties are involved? The Russian Federation, Ukraine, and the United States, correct? And this particular accord, it's quite broad and remarkably comprehensive. It is indicated that this framework agreement contains 28 key points, all of which have already been mutually agreed upon by Witkow and Dmitriev, marking a significant step forward. Witkow serves as Donald Trump's special envoy, and Dmitriev is Putin's special envoy, who, as you might recall, was in Miami a month ago, specifically in October, where he spent 5 days and engaged in discussions with Witkow. The context of the material's authors are characterizing this as a significant breakthrough. A significant breakthrough, but for whom exactly? For the overall situation and a rational proposition for Ukraine. Within these 28 points, there is something that constitutes a rational and sensible proposition for Ukraine, a nation that, given its current circumstances, will seemingly find it impossible to reject what is presently being presented, particularly against the backdrop of the Minichgate corruption scandal and, as articulated by the authors of this material, also against the backdrop of the current unfolding events on the front lines. Zaporizhia direction, Huliaipol, Rivnopilia, and also the Kupiansk direction and the Pokrovsk agglomeration. This news is intended to pressure Ukraine into agreeing to a framework agreement by the conclusion of this very week. There's already a statement from President Volodymyr Zelensky. As you know, he is in Ankara today, not Istanbul. Don't mix them up. It's Ankara. There will be nothing in Istanbul and no discussions with the Russians at all. In Ankara, a meeting is currently unfolding precisely at this very moment within the esteemed residence of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Details of that meeting are still being clarified, but just prior to the meeting, Volodymyr Zelensky has already provided comments concerning this news regarding the 28-point framework agreement, which is intended to satisfy all involved parties. He remarked that this agreement hasn't been seen by us yet, and we will be reviewing it, though he specifically stressed that we played no part in its creation. They drafted it without our input. All the details will be publicly disclosed tomorrow. All the details will be announced in Kyiv upon Volodymyr Zelensky's return, not in Ankara today, but in Kyiv, and there will be a meeting with the Americans. I will tell you who exactly a little later. Now, for some inside information directly from the special envoy of the Russian Federation. He revealed these specific details not to the publication Politico, but rather to a different one, namely Axios. He shared the following information, specifically, Witkow indeed traveled to Miami, where he had a meeting with Dmitriev, who was also present in Miami during the latter part of October. Their discussion centered on a broad concept overall. They engaged in discussions concerning a wide-ranging concept, an important element of which pertains to the future interactions and relationship between the Russian Federation and the United States of America. What other interpretation could there possibly be? Indeed, a significant component of this grand concept is the conflict in Ukraine, specifically the coexistence between the Russian Federation and a democratic, independent Ukraine. This Ukraine will undoubtedly soon become a full and integral part of the European Union, yet it is improbable that it will join the North Atlantic Alliance. Because Dmitriev stated that the fundamental principles being used as a basis are those that were initially laid out during the meeting between Putin and Trump in Anchorage, Alaska. So nothing new under the sun. But the main point is that these are not the demands that Putin and Lavrov have been constantly talking about, voiced back in 24. This is Anchorage, meaning there are concessions, indeed a compromise from the Russian Federation. However, we did hear a specific demand concerning Donbass mentioned. Currently, no one is clarifying precisely what kind of agreement this refers to. A framework agreement satisfying all parties. The territorial issue remains unknown. Only the Anchorage principles are clear. So you can interpret what the Anchorage principles are however you like. The Anchorage principles, I want to emphasize, mean Putin halts at the front line and his sanctions are subsequently lifted. Those are the Anchorage principles. Everything else, territories, blah, 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 that's just wishful thinking that obviously no one is agreeing to, which is why everything has fallen apart until now. However, observe Ushakov's most recent video. He serves as Putin's advisor and his primary contact on the international negotiation track. Observe the emotion, the feeling with which he communicates with the propagandist Zarubin as he responds to questions regarding the specific nuances and the current status of relations with the United States. Just look at his mood. Maybe it will become clearer whether Russia is satisfied with this framework agreement that's being trumpeted today and is in fact being confirmed.
Could there be contact between the leaders in the near future?
As I recall, the leaders conversed with each other on October 16th, together.
They even agreed to meet in Budapest back then.
Yes, they agreed to meet in Budapest. Then the meeting was postponed for a while. Nevertheless, discussions regarding this matter are actively progressing. We are earnestly engaged in talks concerning the Ukrainian resolution, building upon the principles agreed upon in Anchorage. We genuinely believe that this truly represents an excellent pathway for successfully reaching a peaceful settlement.
And the US hasn't moved away from those Anchorage understandings?
Well, as you can see, there has been no formal denial from their end stating that these agreements and understandings are no longer valid. There have been many comments, of course. These comments arise as the situation develops during various negotiations, including those with the Europeans and the Ukrainians. There are many signals. Some we like, some we don't. But the foundation for everything is Anchorage.
But it seems no influence is being exerted on the Kyiv authorities, the kind that was apparently agreed upon back in Anchorage.
Well, you know, the Anchorage understandings have been conveyed to the Kyiv side. They know about it in Kyiv. They dislike it. Many Europeans also dislike Anchorage, but not all. Anchorage is disliked by those who oppose a peaceful settlement, preferring to fight till the last Ukrainian.
Last question. Organization-wise, if leaders meet, it'll be in Budapest. But that brings up many immediate questions, like sanctions. You are all subject to European sanctions. Absolutely everyone. How is that even possible?
It is my belief that if a foundational understanding is successfully established between Washington and Moscow regarding a meeting of their leaders at a specific location, then numerous technical and political complexities would subsequently become less significant.
Well, isn't that fascinating? I just re-listened to Ushakov's statement and it's quite intriguing. He mentions the Anchorage principles, stating that leaders did indeed have contact, but also indicating the existence of other ongoing communications. And it turns out there are some contacts with Kyiv. The Anchorage principles have been formulated and given to the Ukrainians, says Ushakov, who are resisting and don't want them, they don't like them. So if it's all based on the Anchorage principles, what then could be considered satisfactory aspects? You know, satisfactory points, 28 points that will satisfy everyone, can we be talking about? This is a truly fascinating and noteworthy story unfolding right now, especially considering our delegation's recent journey to Turkey. Turkey, in fact. Today, a meeting between Yermak and Witkoff was scheduled in Istanbul, I recall. Witkoff unexpectedly cancelled his flight to Istanbul at the very last moment. Oliver Carroll, a journalist for The Economist, suggested that this turn of events was likely due to Witkoff's perceived lack of deep understanding and engagement with the severe complexities of the Ukrainian corruption crisis. And precisely for that reason, the meeting was cancelled. And this is, you know, a rather peculiar, indeed quite a dangerous situation. So then, why did Yermak fly to Istanbul first and now to Ankara if Witkoff cancelled? Why? Why did our Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, I'm showing the photo now, show up there? He, I'll remind you, handles the track for returning prisoners of war and sanctions-related issues. Why is he there? Who? What about? What was he meant to discuss today? The Americans aren't there. The Russians said they aren't there either. Did everyone involved go there? They were unaware that Witkoff wouldn't be present. Did they not know that this delegation was arriving in Ukraine at this very time? Volodymyr Zelensky, by the way, has discussed this very delegation, noting that these individuals will be in Kyiv tomorrow evening, yes, in the evening as confirmed, to present and clarify this framework agreement, which evidently requires his signature. So who exactly is this person in the photograph? Well, my friends, is Mr. Driscoll. Driscoll, his title is Secretary of the Army. Thus, this is a post within the ministry, specifically in the United States government. It is a civilian position, not a military one. And Driscoll is now, perhaps for the very first time, beginning to lead some kind of talks regarding peace. We hadn't heard this surname previously, but I made it my business to ascertain who he truly is and the specific reasons for his deployment to Kyiv, accompanied by one of the chiefs of staff. Nevertheless, this individual is presently the primary figure, and subsequent to his time in Kyiv, he plans to journey to Moscow. After getting Kyiv's consent on the framework agreement, this man will go to Moscow. Not Witkoff, but this particular individual, likely accompanied by a stenographer, an interpreter, and the like, who will not be left in private with Vladimir Putin. This is because he has been thoroughly informed and directed, not by just anyone, but by Donald Trump himself, along with the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. This gentleman, friends, is a close acquaintance of J.D. Vance. It was J.D. Vance who put forward Driscoll's name to Donald Trump, suggesting he would be the ideal person to oversee and manage all matters related to this particular framework peace agreement, thereby, it seems, bypassing Witkoff in the process. Even though Witkoff had to provide extensive consultation to this individual in significant detail prior to this journey to Kyiv and subsequently to Moscow. So, how exactly does Vance know Driscoll? Well, they were actually fellow students at Yale University, and as a result, the Washington Post reports that this is quite a peculiar narrative. Why send a civilian to negotiate peace during wartime rather than a military figure? However, to me, this seems utterly unimportant and not worth considering. I believe this is absolutely Trump's complete concept, his master plan, to entirely shake things up and attempt to resolve it in this manner, to try out new individuals, adopt a fresh viewpoint, and finally bring an end to this entire situation that, as he expresses it, has persisted in such a bewildering and drawn-out fashion. However, the situation involving Witkoff, to this point, has most certainly not reached its conclusion. We'll have to wait and see what condition our delegation, which is currently in Turkey, returns in tomorrow, first and foremost. Who will make it to Kyiv? Umarov? Yermak? So, precisely who will be arriving in Kyiv tomorrow? And what ultimately are the specific details of this framework agreement, which we essentially became aware of today from a politician? Could it be that they are trying to pawn off a lame duck on Ukraine?